Okay, good evening, everybody. Hello. Right, as everybody's joining, I hope you guys are well. It is still very, very cold in Johannesburg, scarves and the whole bunch. So nice to be back. I took a little bit of time off from social and the online world. It was amazing. But back this week, I'm personally doing two webinars this week. This one, we're going to talk about Photoshop and some introductory kind of basic stuff. I might go a bit deeper. I tend to do that. And then also on Wednesday this week at 7 o'clock, I am doing advanced Lightroom editing. So on that one, I'm going to go super, super deep into all of the special adjustments inside of Lightroom. So what I'm going to do, as always, while everybody is still joining, the chat box I'm going to keep open so we can keep touch there. And if you have any questions, even from now on Photoshop, from a basic point of view, then pop them in the Q&A. So just while we're waiting here, some familiar names. Hey, Martha, hope it's going well. Sergey, Vic, hey, how's it going? So quick one for me, as I always do, just as we get stuck into this. Tracy, hello. How many of you are currently, no, cancel that, don't answer yet. What is currently your main go-to for your wildlife photography processing? Go in the chat function, please. So I can just get an idea. I've got Lightrooms. I'm expecting a lot of Lightroom. I'm expecting a lot of only Lightroom, pretty much only Lightroom. Okay, got it. For minor bit of that, Photoshop to erase things. It is powerful for that. Okay, now that's pretty much what I expected. So now, can you guys please tell me, Martha, yeah, copy that. Your Photoshop knowledge on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being what is Photoshop, 10 is you can't teach me anything. Where do you guys fall on that scale, please? Okay, how do I find it? Around 4. York, the average is probably, guys, average here is about a 2 or a 3. Okay, so this is pretty cool. So I just made some notes here earlier today when I was choosing images. What I'm going to do with you guys today, and this does not replace Lightroom. What I'm going to show you now does not. Now, I'm not disappointed. It's cool. Most people are like, Photoshop what? Well, we'll get there. So what I'm going to do, this does not replace Lightroom. Lightroom to me, and as far as I'm concerned, should still remain the base, home base of your processing. And the reason for that is that it is powerful with regard to cataloging and kind of the library function. You can do all of it in there. It's non-destructive. The user interface is super easy. However, there are 1 or 2 things, especially if you've been processing your images for a while and you feel you need to take it to the next level and do something more, then I do believe that Photoshop can be a very interesting part and addition to this process of your processing. So some of the things I'm going to run through tonight, and remember, this is recorded, and by tomorrow morning, this will be on the Wile Eye YouTube channel. I'm going to look at layers and how they work, dodging and burning within Photoshop. So that's when you make things darker and lighter. Yeah. Spot removal and content aware. So we all, you know, the clone and heal tool in Lightroom where you can take dust spots out, right? Photoshop is ridiculously powerful with this. And I've been saying for a while, that's one of the things that I really wish that Lightroom would get from Photoshop is content aware and that technology. We're going to look a little bit at sharpening inside of Photoshop. And then also just as a fun exercise, and I did this in, I think it was in my monochrome, the paid webinar that I did, is how you can add space to images, which is a bit of a cheat, but it's fun. So I'm going to take you guys into Photoshop, and we're going to go from there. I do see some questions already. Let me quickly throw my eyes there. Okay, that is cool. Patrick, thank you so much. All right, Francois, hey, good evening. Okay, I'm actually going to take this off because it's getting quite hot where I'm sitting here. Okay, so my main trouble, how can I keep a Photoshop file and return to it later to open up with all its layers? That's cool. Transitioning between the two. Martha, great question. Okay, I'm going to just take a step back here. The majority of you will be importing your images directly into Lightroom. You can confirm that. So into Lightroom, whether you use Lightroom to import your images, yeah, or how you do, or you import them and then put them into Lightroom. Okay, so the question here of how can I edit a Photoshop file and come back later? we need to understand one thing here. When you are working in Lightroom, right? When you are working in Lightroom, the file doesn't actually live inside of Lightroom. Remember, it lives elsewhere. It lives in its raw home base. Lightroom accesses it only. You do changes and it saves it. And those changes get saved as it's called a sidecar file or an XMP file, right? If you go deep into Lightroom, you can see those things. Photoshop works slightly differently. Now, all of you on here so far with me understand Lightroom to a certain degree, yes? So Lightroom is kind of your go-to. So I'm going to just quickly share my screen of Photoshop, show you one or two things, and I'm coming back before we dive in. So I'm going to take you to Photoshop over there. Okay, I'm still keeping the chat function open if anybody has any questions. So this here is the home base for Photoshop. So what you get is down the side, you have all your tools, right? These are the tools, and we're going to play with quite a few of these now during this session. If you open multiple files inside of Photoshop, they sit at the top here. So it's like tabs of a browser, like your internet browser. So the tabs sit at the top. You can open and close each one, right? This little cross will close this file and so on. You can open as many images inside of Photoshop as you wish, right? But they're working separately. It's not the same as Lightroom. Lightroom saves it inside the Lightroom brain. This has to either be applied to the image, right? Or as a separate new file next to the image. So I'm going to say that again. If you do multiple files inside of Lightroom, the changes you make to the file does not get written onto the file. It gets written into a sidecar file, which is saved inside Lightroom's brain. So if you go to your raw folder and you've processed something with Lightroom, right? There will only be the files that you've been using. If you do this in Photoshop and you go to the original raw folder, there will be a new file because Photoshop has to write that information somewhere. So it's just a bit of a confusing thing sometimes. Then, who asked you, Turgo? What I'll show you as well is the layer function we're going to play with. So on the right-hand side of the top here, you get layers, right? The background layer. And that's why I'm going to start you guys off today and just show you how the layers work and why it is such a powerful tool. All right. So quickly for me now, and I'm back on the chat function here. Everybody happy of how to either take, if you've watched my previous webinars, you would get this, how to take an image from Lightroom, do raw stuff, processing, and put it into Photoshop, or just to natively open a file in Photoshop. You're all happy with that? Yes. Please confirm for me. Okay, that's the simple part. Inside of Photoshop, you just go File, Open, you pick your file. It can be a raw file, it can be a TIFF, a PSD, whatever the case is. Okay, so I'm going to dive straight into Photoshop now, and we're going to go into the layer function. I want to explain layers to you a little bit and just show you a very basic adjustment, which is basically the same thing as the black and white slider that you get inside of Lightroom. Right, here we go. Guys, I'm seeing the question pop up in the Q&A. We'll pop back there in a little bit. Into Photoshop we go. Okay, so I've chosen a couple of files here for different reasons, and we're going to play with these a little bit. I'm going to start you off with this lion shot here. This is from the Massa Mara, I think end of last year, actually. So now, what you see when you open a file inside of Photoshop, you get this over here. This down here is layers. You could just confirm, you can all see what I'm pointing at here. The layers on the right-hand side of the screen, yes? Okay, perfect. So when you open a file, by default, it is the background file, which means it is the bottom layer. So if I could imagine, right? If you could imagine this picture, right? This page is the bottom file. Any changes that you make, you can either make onto that layer, so it's flat and you can't change that, or you can duplicate that layer and have another one on top. Okay, I'm going to come back to me, Francois, now in a second. So the first thing you need to know is once your layer is here, you can duplicate this layer by simply going right-click on it. Oopsie, sorry, my right-click, Shazmin will get there, and duplicate. You can now give it a name. So let's say, for example, we're going to do sharpening. I can call this the sharpening layer. And what you'll see here now there's 2 of these. Okay, you can duplicate as many as you want, depending on what you're going to do. Now, for what we are going to do as wildlife photographers, you're probably not going to have more than 4 of these layers. Right, I'm coming back to you for a second. So that layer, when you open a file, think of it as a page, an image, right? That's the image. There it is. Let me do it. There it is. Now, if you duplicate the layer, what it does is it duplicates that exact thing and it puts it on top of it. So if I'm looking at it, you're looking at the top layer, yeah? Anything I do onto this layer will apply just to this. Your base still looks the same, but I'm seeing it from the top. Does that make sense, please? This is an important thing. This is an important thing. Okay, so when you layer, you're duplicating on top of each other and someone's looking from the top. So if I do this, right, I'm duplicating. There's my base layer. I duplicate it on top, right? If I now take my duplicated version and I take a piece of it away, I'm seeing some of the top one and some of the bottom one. This is where layering gets interesting. And you'll see where we're going with this. You see where we're going with this. Okay, everybody happy with that? Layers. I'm going to now show you what we can do with some of those layers. Back into Photoshop we go. And Shazmin will answer that question for you now. So we're back in Photoshop. So I'm going to delete this layer. So to manage these layers, right, it's as simple as right-clicking on them, and you can duplicate, you can delete, you can create groups. That's more for the advanced stuff. We can do one-on-ones if you want. I'm going to delete this layer so we start from scratch. Okay, so we know that it's the background layer because it says background. See this little lock icon? That means it's fixed. That's your base. Okay, now I'm just going to quickly create another layer by going right-click, duplicate, and I'm just going to call this, let's go monochrome. I'm going to go monochrome. So it's not monochrome yet, but I know if I'm going to work on the monochrome aspect, I'm going to do that layer because it's highlighted. So just for visual effect, for you guys to understand, I'm now going to go take this layer. If you want to do adjustments inside of Lightroom, in Photoshop, in Lightroom, you've got the sliders on the right-hand side. Here, you're going to drop down, 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 and you get this icon here. You guys see that? I click on that, and here's all the adjustments that I can do. All right. Remember, guys, we're not going deep. We're going top level on these things. So I'm going to then say black and white. So I now have created a black and white version from the top. Okay. Can you see that there's a new layer that has been created? Right? There's a new layer that's been created. And as it stands, if I want to do anything to this layer, I double click on it and it opens the color sliders. This is very similar. Go and watch some of my monochrome work, right? The webinars. Here, I can adjust the different channels of color, right? And you can see how powerful that can be. And we're just messing around here, right? So here we can do all these kind of things. Click out. Now, and this is important. You guys need to stay with me here. This is important. If someone is looking at this image now, they are seeing from the top down. So this adjustment here, the black and white monochrome, is applying to all the layers underneath. Now, this is a little cool trick that you can, and you can watch this later on again. If you want this monochrome version just to apply to the layer directly below it, makes sense, not all the way. You hold Option, watch what happens to my cursor. See, it changes to that, and I click there. Now, with this little arrow, it means this monochrome is only applying to this layer. Okay, does that make sense? Just, we're working pretty much from top to bottom. You guys with me here? We're gonna do this a couple of times, so we'll kind of get into it, yeah? Turgay, thank you so much. Cool, Belinda. So now, if I want to see what's happening underneath, because if I'm showing this, what you're seeing on my screen is from the top down. People watch from the top down. These little eyes on the side, I can now hide the changes. Okay, so if I take away the top layer, we're seeing everything that's underneath. But now I'm adding in the layer and I'm only seeing the top one. It doesn't affect the bottom one. It's literally me holding up that piece of paper, putting a monochrome one in front of it, And that's what you see. Now, hold that thought. You guys lost yet? Okay, just are you happy with what I've just done? Does that make sense? How you do an adjustment, it applies to the top layer, but it doesn't change anything underneath. Okay, that's the first part of it. Now, the win. And on this example with the mono, I will repeat again. Franco, we're going to do this a couple of times. The win from layers is that you can drop the opacity. So what that means, right, is if you have your bottom layer, you put a layer on top, you turn the top layer that you can see, you'll turn into monochrome, right? You can drop the opacity of the top layer and fade the adjustment in. And when you get to things like sharpening, this is the win. But I specifically wanted to show you this with monochrome because it's the easiest example. Back we go. So we're back here. So I now click and I select this top layer, which is my monochrome work, yes? If I go up to here, opacity, 100%. So right now the opacity is 100. If I take the opacity to 0, it's basically see-through and it doesn't exist. 50% will only give me 50% of the adjustment as someone looks through it. So watch what happens when I take this opacity and I slowly take it down. See what happens? So now this is a 50% opacity, which means you are seeing the base color and only 50% of the top layer is showing. Please tell me that makes sense. This is important. You're dropping the opacity of the top layer and you can see through. You should already be thinking at this stage, any adjustment that you're going to make on that top layer, you can be a little bit more aggressive on it, especially with things like sharpening, yeah? And then you can just drop the opacity to fade it in. It's a great thing. So I've now still got 50% opacity here. I can hide this layer by doing that. See, so this is without the monochrome. That is with 50% of the monochrome. Okay, and you can blend this in here to anything that you want. So if you wanted to go for like an old, like antique type African, then something like this, these muted colors, simply put a monochrome version on it and fade it out from there. Yes? Okay, so that's the first step for layers. Now, I'm going to, Turgai, I think you asked, right? I think you asked about how do I save a file, but come back and edit the layers later on. If I was going to save this file as it is now, watch what happens. I can go File, Save As. Let me just put this on desktop for now, right? And it comes up here and it automatically makes it as a PSD file. Now, when you save it as a PSD file, Photoshop document, when you open this, Turgai, it'll be exactly with the layers because down here it says save with layers. So if you're going to go deep on your processing and you're going to have layer after layer after layer and you're going to take time, then save it like this. For the other people here, cancel this. If you want to save this as a JPEG, your final version, and you want to use it somewhere like on Instagram or whatever the case is, two ways. You can either go File, Save As, and you select the file type as JPEG. Because a JPEG is a single layer file. It doesn't have layers. It's the most simple file. So either you do that, and then you save it as a JPEG, or if you don't want to have the layers and you're happy with it, you go to the bottom one, you right click, and you say Flatten Image. So watch what happens now when I hit Flatten Image. Watch my layers at the top here. Boom. Now the background is the image with all of the adjustments that I've made so far. Okay, I'm going to come back to you for a second here. Guys, are you still with me? Please tell me you're not lost. You've got this. Okay, and there's no going back. Yes. Once you go, so you can, I've got one or two no's, but we'll get there. We'll get there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you again. If you want to duplicate a layer, right click, duplicate, and it just doubles it up. Also, if you are now going to make adjustments, and what I'm going to show you now is how you can set the black point and the white point inside of Photoshop. Not inside Camera Raw, inside actual Photoshop. So back to Photoshop we go here. I'm going to go into there. Liz asked, what is the benefit of flattening? So what is the benefit of flattening? So if you're going to work a file again and again, like if you're working on a big picture, like a migration crossing this wildebeest and a crocodile and a leopard in the tree and a pangolin crossing the river and everything, and you're going to take time, I wish I could see that. But if you're going to take time to work that, Liz, and you want to not do everything at once, you can save the layers and come back. Save the layers and come back. When you're finished, that's when you flatten. Flattening is the last thing that you do before you save your final file. Okay, so let's choose another image here. Let's use the giraffe. Okay, so I now want to set the black point and white point using Photoshop. It still is based out of layers. Now, okay, hold that thought. Gaurav, do me a favor, go and ask that in the Q&A, please, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So what you do is I can either right click over here and make another layer, or I can come down. Remember the down, this little button here, that's why I select my adjustments. This pops up, and these are all the ones. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these, right? I'm not going to go into all of these. The ones I want to show you is levels. Okay, you click on levels. Now, what it does is it automatically then creates a new layer with just the layers. Watch. Boom. So you see, there's my layer at the top now, right? And down here, you've got the background. This is fine, but now I prefer, personally, to work on a separate layer, right? As a separate layer. But for now, we can do this. So what you do, you've now got, this is one of the adjustment layers. To change the settings of what you're doing, double click on this, and you have a little histogram. Just quickly, in the chat function, does everybody understand what the histogram is and how it works? This is important. This is important for you to understand the histogram. Yes, 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 yes. Good. Loads of yeses. A bit we can work with. I can work with a bit. Okay. Now, if you understand, and you've been watching my Lightroom videos over the last couple of years, the black point and white point is vital. So underneath the histogram, and watch again, I'm going to redo this. I'm going to delete this layer. This one, delete. I'm going to go down to select it. I click on this icon at the bottom. I come up and I select levels, which gives me my histogram, right? And that's broken down into 3 sliders underneath the histogram. It's basically blacks, midtones, and whites. Now, the same as in Lightroom, you can hold this slider, the black one, and hold Option on a Mac, and I think it's Alt on a PC. Watch what happens to the image. It turns to white. If I take it up, exactly the same as Lightroom, guys, exactly the same. So you can figure out where your black point is. So that little bit of color you're seeing on the giraffe's neck, right? That is pure black now, and release. I'm now going to do the same with the white one. I hold the white slider, I hold Option, and I come down until I get specks of white. There we go. So now you see at the bottom, I think that's my watermark. There we go. And I release that. I have now, by doing those 2 adjustments, I've set the black and the white point, same as in Lightroom. Watch, if I turn this adjustment off now, this layer, this is the same as going before and after in Lightroom. Off and on. Can you guys see the difference there? That's without this layer, that's with that layer. That's the one part where Lightroom is still super easy, is to get that before and after. But by clicking the layers on and off here, you can see it. Okay, so leaving it on is important. It gives it that little bit of a pop. Okay, any questions so far just on that layering aspect? How to work this? How to work this? The basics. You can duplicate and you can create your levels and you can go from there. Any questions just on that? Shazmin's good so far. I like that. Okay, good so far. Now, we're going to move on from here and try something different. This is actually quite a nice giraffe shot. Let me go back here. Okay, so now, if I want to finish this image and I'm going to save it as, how do I do that? I can just go right click and flatten. Okay, pretty simple. Now, let's choose something else here. We go with dodging and burning. Okay, In the chat function, please, do we all understand the difference between dodging and burning and what it is? You can do it in Lightroom and you can do it in Photoshop from old school. Dodging and burning. Okay. No, yes. Okay, let's run through it anyway. Dodging and burning is a simple thing that if you take an adjustment brush inside of Lightroom and you paint a certain area with it and you make it darker, you're burning it, right? And this comes from the old days of dark rooms where you enjoy dinner. Someone's going to have dinner. Enjoy your dinner. You can either burn it to make it darker or dodge it to make it lighter. Okay, that makes pretty much easy sense. So now think about this and bear with me for a second here. I am going to duplicate this layer because I want to make any adjustments on a layer, not on the background, because then I can blend it in more afterwards. Just gives me so much control. How do I do that? Right click, duplicate layer. And I'm going to call this, just for instance now, dodge and burn. Okay, so on the side, there's my dodge and burn. So with that dodge and burn layer highlighted, yes, any things I do to this now will be applied to the top layer. My bottom layer stays safe. All right, here we go. Dodging and burning. On your tool set on the left-hand side here, if I scroll down, and I get to this icon here, all right, and I click on that, there's three: dodge tool, burn tool, and sponge tool. How many of you have used the sponge tool? It's actually pretty cool. It's pretty cool if you want to do isolated color adjustments, but we'll get there. So the dodging tool is going to make things lighter. The burn tool is going to make things darker. So I'm going to play on this zebra. So my zebra here is a pretty cool silhouette, but I would like more detail on him. Am I going to dodge him or burn him? What is the correct answer, please? Am I going to dodge my zebra or burn my zebra? Dodging is the correct answer. Well played, tour guy. Oh, you all got it. Well played. So this is important now because in Lightroom, you choose your brush and then you do all those settings underneath, and that's what the brush does. In Photoshop, it's more kind of linear. It's the one way. So I select my dodge tool, and now look at the top here, what happens. This menu system here. Range. What do you want to dodge, i.e. make lighter? The shadows, the midtones, or the highlights? So if I want to lift my zebra up and give him a little bit more brightness, he's dark. That's not midtones. So I'm going to choose shadows. Exposure is basically the volume of how much dodging you're going to do. I'm going to leave that at 100, and we're going to go from there. So my brush size, you can see my cursor, the brush size. You can either use this tool here, right, to change the brush size, or you just use the two square brackets. So the two square brackets opens and closes your brush. Now, I'm going to come down, and I'm just going to paint over my zebra. Watch. 1 stroke, 2 stroke, 3 stroke. Now I'm going to just do a bit on the face. So I'm just clicking on him. Okay, that was pretty simple. But now here's the cool thing. Watch this. If I turn the top layer off, I only made my adjustments on the top layer. If I hide the top layer, the bottom is still there, original. This is where the magic comes in. When I work on my top layer, I would normally overcook it a bit. I would go harder than I think I might, right? So because now you can see that I've done something to the zebra because it's a bit too much. What do? I go to the top layer, which I've done too much on, and I can then drop the opacity and blend this zebra in. Can you guys see how it's blending in? Now you can use and you can blend in to the exact kind of brightness, which gives you the detail that you need, but it doesn't look overcooked like that. It can be super subtle. Shazmin, the stuff you're doing now with those guys, go and follow Shazmin. I think it's Spoken Wildlife on Instagram. Phenomenal stuff with like dark shadows around and white lines around. This stuff for you is golden, absolutely golden. So, going to come back to you for a second. Did that make sense, what I just did? How I dodged the zebra, and then we kind of faded it in to get the balance. Okay, I'm going to do it again, but this time I'm going to use sharpness. So we're going to how to sharpen. the dodging and burning, golden. And the next one, I'm going to go to that owl image. Go and look for, actually, guys, if you want to follow Shazmin, check my story after this. I will tag her and then go and follow her. Some great work. Spoken wildlife you can look for. Okay, so I'm going to now show you on the next image. I'm going to take an image of an owl. I'm going to do two things. Number one, I'm going to dodge and burn some of it to get balance. And then I'm going to create another layer. So we have 3 layers, which is sharpening. Here we go. So guys, keep the questions coming. I do see them. We will pop over to those in a little while, but the chat function is open. All right. So where is my owl? Okay. So there's my owl. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. So now I know, now I'm going to do a couple of things to this. First thing, I right click on background. I duplicate it. This is going to be, let's just go dodge and burn. Okay, so there's my dodge and burn layer. I'm going to do that first, but I know I'm going to sharpen this as well later on. So I duplicate the top one again, duplicate layer, and I call this sharpening. All right, so there. But for now, I'm going to work on dodging and burning. So what do? I hide the top one and I select the bottom one. Guys, please, important, in the chat function, does that make sense? I hide the top one, so I'm not looking at it, but I'm working the middle one. Because if you leave the top one visible and you work on the bottom one, you're not going to see it because the top one's covering it. Yes? So hide that. Spaghetti is nice. Okay, and mince. That's bizarre. Okay, so on the dodging and burning, I want to do a couple of things. I'm going to dodge and burn. So if you want to roll really deep, you can create a dodging layer and a burning layer if you want to go that route. I'm just going to do it all on one. So I go over my tools here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to burn a little bit, right? Which means I want to make something darker. So I'm going to go quite big on my brush because I want to make these branch, the green, I want to push back a little bit. So in the chat function, please, shadows, midtones, or highlights. If I want to lose some of the green and I want to push it back, are they shadows, midtones, or highlights? Because the pitch black would be shadows, the very bright areas would be highlights, and everything else is kind of a midtone, right? So it's a tough one. I would personally start with midtones, yeah, and then just see how it goes. So I'm going to say my exposure is 100, and is there an auto mask? There is. It's a little bit more advanced, but there is. So we can maybe offline that one. So watch, I go over once, I go over twice. That's it. So that was my midtones, yeah. So if I hide what I just did in this layer, see the difference? So I've just pushed it back a little bit. Just pushed it back. So that was the burning, right? Important button or shortcut for Lightroom is Command Z or Control Z. It's undo, and you can undo all the way to the beginning. If you want to see your history, on the side, there's this icon over here, and there's the steps that I've done to this file. Very similar to Lightroom, where you can then backtrack and do the whole thing. Right, so that's your layer, your history. Okay, let's go back. And now I'm going to say on the same layer, make sure I'm now going to change, and I now want to dodge, which means make it a bit lighter. So on this bird, right, I want to make the highlights a little bit brighter, just because. Okay, too bright. See how it burnt? All I do then is I undo, and I can drop my exposure, let's say to 50, and then it becomes a little bit more subtle. Make sense? So as it is on this layer, dodge and burn, that's what I've done. I've shifted the visual mass. Okay, makes sense. Yes, I'm overcooking it a bit just for visual effect. Okay, now I'm thinking, cool, I like this. Now I'm going to sharpen. There's a couple of ways, but in Photoshop, the easiest way I found, and specifically, if you go into Instagram or social media with it, this is pretty handy. I need to first go and select my top layer, and I have to turn it on so it's visible. Okay, see what's happened now. We did that on purpose. Watch what happens. Because you created all the layers up front. If I turn the top one on, it was a duplicate of this one. I've made changes to the middle one, right? But the top one is still the original, so I've undone all my work. Got it? So you want to create the layers as and when needed. Don't ever go and create 15 and then try and manage that. It ain't going to work. So we delete that and we duplicate the current one. Just in the chat function. Happy. That makes sense. Natalie, yes, you can. You can sharpen in Photoshop even if you have already done it in Lightroom. Okay, so now it's the same thing. On this, and this is a super, super easy. And Natalie, on your question, is Lightroom, there's actually, I must go and dig this up. I did a blog post way back. There's multiple sharpening ways. The first sharpening we do is actually raw sharpening. You still have to do what's called output sharpening. And I'm looking at Nick Filters 2.0 as a premium webinar coming up in the next couple of weeks. And in printing, I'm doing a printing webinar next week. The output sharpening is vital. And this is what we're looking at now. What you're doing now is output sharpening, where inside of Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, that is actually raw level sharpening. So there's those two things. Okay. For now, easiest way, I select my top layer, which I've just created. I go to filter at the top of the screen here. I come down, 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 down to sharpen, and we go to sharpen more. Right. Now I've got blog posts as well, which I'll reshare at some stage about smart sharpen and sharp mask. This for now it's crude, but it works, especially for online. Watch, click that. So now let me just zoom in a little bit for you. I'm going to hide the sharpening layer. See what it does. Can you guys see that? With, without, with, without. With, however, I'm sure you will agree, a little bit aggressive. But here is the win one more time. Opacity 0, it doesn't exist. I can now go up and keep on going until I'm happy, probably there somewhere. So without and with, without and with. Guys, please tell me that makes sense. How you can do the layering and overcook an adjustment and then just use opacity to bring it back in. You're blending it all together. It is golden. Now, on Wednesday, on my premium webinar, I'm going to go into Lightroom Adjustments. There is a way in Lightroom that you can recreate, almost like mimic layers. But you have to keep track. It's not designed for that, but you can almost mimic it with brushes and duplicating brushes and kind of inverting them. But I'll show you that on Wednesday if you are joining for that one. For now, though, let's go back. I'm going to leave layers just for a second. I want to go into spot reduction, like dust spot removal and content aware. For those of you that have been on one of the other webinars, you might recognize some of this, but let's fly through it because this to me is, again, one of the things where Photoshop beats Lightroom hands down. Okay, so tour guy, if you are still here, again, if I wanted to save this to keep working later, I would save this file by going File, Save As, and then I would save it as a PSD file. When you open it, it will open with all its layers, right? But for now, we're not worried about that. So let's say I wanted to put this onto Instagram. I would then say right-click, flatten, and save it as a JPEG. Okay, now spot removal. I chose this shot. This is a very old image of mine. I think I was, even before I started Wile Eye or Photo Africa. This is from way back then. But I selected this purely because of all the little dots, right? Which is stars and all kinds of stuff. So dust spot removal and content aware. So just to give you an idea one more time, if we're talking about clone and heal inside of Lightroom, what it does, if you want to remove something here, you select that area, Lightroom then looks for another place, takes something and puts it on top, right? It basically clones something else onto there. What Photoshop does is it takes the area that you're looking at. So if you were to highlight my face, it will look at the face area, calculate whatever's around it, and build up those pixels to match the surrounding area. That's content aware. So I'm going to show you that, and then we're going to extrapolate it back down to the spot removal. Watch this. I like that. Okay, so before we get to those spot thingies then, let's go here and find okay, I'm going to use this. Okay, you can all, sorry, let me just open my chat function so I can keep up with you guys. All right, sorry, just confirm for me, I had a tech, can you all see my screen? You can all see my screen, the giraffe with my, down here. Okay, cool. So, content aware is like magic. When this came out and Lightroom Adobe announced this, people lost their minds. All right, what you do, and it is this simple. You come up to your tools here and you select the Lasso Tool, easiest one. All you do is you now draw a circle around what you don't want, around the bad part. So I'm going to just do this. Let's say we remove that and release. With the area lassoed, I simply hit backspace or delete. That box pops up. Content aware, which one more time, it means Photoshop's going to calculate everything around the area I've selected and build it up. When I hit OK, watch. Done. Click out, it's gone. Got it? How cool is that? How cool is that? So let's go a little bit bigger, just to show you. This is a pretty nice giraffe. If I wanted to get rid of him, content aware, I'm going to lasso him. I'm going to hit delete or backspace. Photoshop's going to calculate what's around it and build it in as if it was never there. Let's try it out. So we just lasso. I'm going quite rough and crude. It's like staying in the lines when you're at school. Okay, how's that? So now I'm going to go delete and I'm going to say, okay, calculate, it's gone. Yeah, it's clean. It's very clean. Okay, so that is content aware technology. So that is how you would, if you are that way inclined or for print or whatever, that you want to take stuff away, you cannot beat Photoshop. Bar none. Now, you all know the clone and heal tool inside of Lightroom, like we spoke about, dust spot removal. And you can visualize the spots, which is cool and everything, but it is still based on technology that takes something and replaces it. The version that Photoshop uses this content-aware technology. It is ridiculous. This is how you do it. So let's go back to that star image. Yo, not my best work, but it was a fun evening. It was a fun evening. Okay, so now let's just for argument's sake say that all of these little dots here are dust spots. I want to get rid of them. Like you would if you shot, for example, a panning image, which has a lot of that. You're not going to lasso them. That's going to take forever, right? Come down and there's this spot healing brush tool. Click that. And you basically get your cursor, which you can then open and close as big as you want. Okay, so let's just leave it there. You can simply now click once on every dot that you want to remove, and very quickly, Photoshop uses content-aware technology to build it up and cover it. Watch. Click, 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 click. This is way faster and way more accurate because it builds it up. See how fast this is going compared to Lightroom, because sometimes Lightroom gets it wrong. And then you got to redo it and you got to check it again, and that area is clean. That's how quick it is, right? You literally just click on each dot and it goes away. It is amazing. The cool thing though as well is with this, right? With the spot healing brush tool, you can also draw lines, right? So let's say, for example, this, I think it was a satellite as I was doing this pan thing. If I wanted to try and get rid of that, let's go in a little bit there. And I just go, make it a bit smaller, and I draw a line and release. Okay, I missed it, and it's gone. So I want to get rid of that. Release, gone. There. Okay, but you can see it builds up. It doesn't just take it away. It builds up stuff underneath. So as far as dust spot removal and cleaning up images, this, the little plaster with a dot, the spot healing brush tool is ridiculous. The speed, and let me show you one more time here, that with which you can do the cleaning up is literally you're just clicking on each dot and you don't have to worry about what it gets replaced with. Like in Lightroom, you can often see the little circle. This is clean because it uses technology and it builds it up from scratch. How quick is that? Okay, that to me, this and content aware, if we could get that into Lightroom, it would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. Right, I'm coming back to you guys here. Does that all make sense up until there? Just, it's layers is important. You can blur it out, right? And you can drop the opacity. Sharpening, sharpen more, drop the opacity. Golden. Monochrome, dodging and burning, but always do it on a separate layer so that you can blend it in again. Now, before we get to Q&A, just for shits and giggles, I'm going to show you, and I did this in one of the other ones as well. I can't remember which webinar it was, how to add. Content aware can be used in a bit of a flip way as well. Just for fun, watch this, then I'm going to come to Q&A. So let's go back to my, oh, giraffe's gone. Undo, it's back. Okay, so that the undo feature actually works pretty well. But let me quickly just, this, I'm going to deselect. Hang on. I'm going to take this file back to original status. Let me just open my chat function here so I can have you guys on board for this. I just want to show you quickly, if you are lazy and you don't do the lasso tool, right? You can also do the following. You can just take this, what's it called? The spot removal, and you can literally just, I hope this works. Let's check. Is I can then just do this. So now I'm just drawing on what I don't want, because that will be removed. Release, done. Okay, super simple. The lasso tool is the original way, but you can do it by just painting the subject. He's back. Okay, now this is just for fun. For those of you that want prints, and I think this was in the monochrome workshop, we did this. Let's say, for example, you needed more space. You wanted a bigger image. Just watch this, but I'm going to link this to content aware. If I want to increase my canvas size, I'm going to go image, canvas size. I want this as a % of the original. I'm going to put my cursor here, which means it only goes to the right. You guys can watch this again when it's on YouTube. It's actually not that difficult, right? And then on width, I'm going to say, give me an extra 20%, or let's do 10, just because. 10% on width, and it's only going to the right. And it's going to extend the color with white. Watch. Okay. So now what I've done is I've basically just added some white on the side. If you do prints, this is also how you would put a white border around your frame. But I'll do that in the print webinar next week. So I now want to use content aware and get rid of this white. Watch this. So I'm not going to use lasso tool. I'm going to use the rectangular tool because it's easier. I select a little bit of the blue and all of that. Okay. Now, what I'm asking Photoshop is if I hit delete now, right? It comes up with content aware, like we know. It's going to then look at this white and see, okay, there's white, which is pretty simple. It's going to try and build up other stuff that looks similar onto that area. I am expecting it to open up so I've got bigger canvas. Watch what happens when I hit OK. Boom. See what happened? And I click out. Did you guys see that? So I created the white canvas. I then said to Photoshop, I don't want the white, content to wear it away, and it builds it up. One more time, watch this, image. One more time, Gaurav, here we go. So image, canvas size. I want to increase the canvas only to the right. So I put my cursor there and it's only go to the right. I work in %, and you can decide. I'm going to, let's say, I don't know, 12%. So it's now going to take the entire width of the image, and I'm going to add 12% to the right-hand side only. So there's my new canvas area. Now, what you do is you take the rectangular tool and you do that. Remember now, what this means is if I hit delete, I'm asking Photoshop now to look at the area that I've selected, right? And if I hit OK, it's going to look at the areas outside of it, which in this instance is just this, because the rest is not in frame. So it looks at this area here and it tries to build up that. Here we go. Done. That is pretty damn cool, right? That is pretty cool. So if you ever have an image where you, for example, have the image quite tight on the side, you want to build it up, that would be how you do it. Okay. Now, any questions on any of that? I'm going to go to Q&A. Yeah. Sometimes a tool will stick and I can't move to another tool. Is it something like that or done? I have had that as well, tour guy. I'm not sure. I've had Command Z or Command Z undo that for me. But other one, it was a glitch. Other times I would literally just minimize Photoshop and open it again. That's also worked. But it is a glitch. They do those kind of updates often. So it should be that. Or you can just try and use the same shortcut key that you started with, but that's a different one. Okay, guys, I'm going into Q&A. Let's see what we've got. Okay, can you open from RAW direct to Photoshop if necessary? You can 100%, Francho, you can. What would happen is if you do that, then it comes up with Adobe Camera Raw, which is basically the same as the Lightroom panel. And the same shortcuts work, the same sliders work. So if you open a RAW file, it doesn't open the Photoshop work interface I just showed you now. It opens ACR or Adobe Camera Raw. Give it a try. If you know Lightroom, you'll feel right at home. Right at home. Okay, next one. When I usually work with Lightroom, should I edit the picture first in Photoshop and then import into Lightroom? No, Marcus, what I would do is you would still use Lightroom as your library, your marking, your cataloging, and only throw it into Photoshop as and when needed. Inside of Lightroom, you can right-click on the image and say edit in Photoshop, opens it in Photoshop, do whatever specific stuff you want to do, and it'll come back into Lightroom when you save it. So I would still use Lightroom as my base, always. It would go Photoshop, sorry, Lightroom, Photoshop, Nick filters if you want, Photoshop, Lightroom. I've done some of those, but there is new ones coming up as well, so stay tuned for those. Why can't you just put everything in black and white because it looks professional? Well, it does, and most things do look quite good in black and white, but it depends on the content, hey? Like portraits look great, landscape looks great, but you can, and it does look pretty professional. Okay, next one. Can you sharpen subject and not background? Sandra, yes, you can. You can. What you would have to do is you need to select and layer things. So I will actually, after I'm finished with Q&A, I'll go back and just show you very quickly how you could do that. Next one, should you use layers also for cloning? So are we talking cloning as in adding things in or removing? If you are removing, you would probably remove it from the base layer, because otherwise, if you're going to drop opacity, that thing comes back. Yeah. But if you are adding in cloning, no, I will probably do it on your base layer. Do it on your base layer. Okay. Question: does content aware technology just work with the newest Photoshop version or also in the older versions? So content aware has been around for like, you caught me here, I think maybe 2 or 3 years. So any of the Photoshops in that time, I think up until Photoshop 6 or 7, it didn't have it. So if you're on the CC, the cloud version, then you'll have all the latest update. But I think just go and check what version you have. If you're not sure, drop me an email and I'll be happy to check that out for you. But in the last couple of updates, it has been involved. Martha, how do you then return to Lightroom? So what would happen is, Martha, if you go from Lightroom and you right-click, edit in Photoshop, it opens your file in Photoshop, and then do whatever you need to do. All you have to do then, if it came from Lightroom, and you go File, Close in Photoshop, or File, Save, and you close Photoshop, if you go back to Lightroom, the new file would be next to the original. So it automatically takes it back into Lightroom when you save it, if it came from Lightroom. Yeah? Okay, next one here. what would you recommend as the most amount of layers? So it's an interesting question because for us, the purposes that we do, I can't think of a time where I had more than like 6 or 7. But that's hardcore editing. That's like areas. You select the background, then the wildebeest and the crocodile. I've seen some designers and stuff literally, I mean, even some of the graphics we use for Wile Eye online, we have about 27 layers, the logo, then the text, then the this, then the that. So maybe if you guys are keen, I can do a little bit more advanced, go layers in Photoshop, and we can go deeper on that. But Natalie, I wouldn't go more than about 3 or 4. I think then you're starting to push it a little bit. It gets messy, and it shouldn't be messy. What have we got? My setup is different from yours. So when I click layer, it doesn't show up like yours. Okay, I'll answer, Shadman, I'll answer that as well now when I go back. I'll show you now. Patrick asked, what exactly is it that you do in Lightroom after you've finished up in Photoshop? So that would depend. I mean, if you're doing monochrome, so I did the ultimate monochrome one a little while ago. When I go back into Lightroom from Photoshop, what I would do then is I would use the brush and I would just use it to push and pull the tones. But most of the time, I will take it back and it just becomes a part of my library, because you should be using Lightroom as your home base for everything. So to have the changed version from Photoshop back in there makes sense to me. But you can then keep going. So when a file comes from Photoshop back into Lightroom, it starts at a 0 rated file. So there's no adjustments on the sliders. So you can then keep going. For monochrome, it's great because with monochrome, you mustn't be subtle. You're going to smack someone in the face with it. That's the best way to do it. Have you already looked into the Nik Filters 3? Is it worth upgrading? Probably worth it. Yes, it does. I haven't upgraded yet. I looked at some of the changes, but yes, I would upgrade, and I still will, probably in this week. I've been offline for a little bit. What if we don't flatten? Okay, so if you don't flatten your layers inside of Photoshop and you take it back to Lightroom, it saves a new TIFF file, TIFF, tagged image file format, which also has layers. So if you open it later on again, it will have your layers included. Yep. And I've got a question. Is saving a TIFF file the same quality as RAW? So quality-wise, yes. File information, no. Okay. Yes or no? But TIFF, if you're going to rework a file again and again and again, stay as a TIFF and only save it to JPEG right at the end. The cool thing, a TIFF is quality like a RAW. You can save a TIFF. You can't resave a RAW file. But yes. Okay. I'm going to quickly just remind myself here. Okay, I'm going to get back to the chat now as I go back in here. I had to show you guys 2 things. What was it? The first one was Shazmin, just show you how to do that. Most amount of layers. Oh man, I can't find it. Sharpen. Oh, how can you sharpen the subject, not the background? So final time, we're going back to Photoshop. Just quickly. Okay, so Shazmin, for you, let me just close that. I want to open. Okay, I'm not in the chat, guys. I'm going to come back there in a second. If you are not sure of your layout, what you can do is you can come up to view here, first window, and you go down and say workspace. There's a couple of different workspaces that you have here. 3D, motion, painting, photography, there we go, graphic and web. So by clicking this, it changes everything on the side for you based on that. And then you can still customize this as you go. But that's where you'd start. If you've messed it up dramatically, click on reset and it takes it back. But those are the different options, Shazmin, that you can look at. Okay, then the other one now is if you want to selectively sharpen just the foreground. Just the foreground, what you're going to do. Okay, this last one's a little bit more advanced, but let's run through it quickly. Right click, duplicate. Right, now what I'm going to do is you have to put a mask on here. By doing that, you select the background layer, the new layer, you click this icon at the bottom and it selects a mask over here. Right, now what that does, what's the easiest for me to show you, is if I now select, hang on, let me do it this way. I'm going to do this. I'm going to duplicate. Just stick with me here. I'm going to turn this one into monochrome, not sharpening, because it's easier for me to show you. No, Gerry, focus. Where's monochrome? Black and white. Okay. And then it's got this mask thing over here. Right. Now, if you paint, so the adjustment of monochrome has been applied to the entire frame. Read sharpening. I can now go and use a brush, a normal brush, right? And these are the colors that I'm going to brush on there. If I select black, right? Watch what happens in this mask here as I paint. All right. Black reveals what's underneath. Black reveals what's underneath. So in that question, how do you sharpen the background? Or not sharpen the background? You would do this. You would apply sharpness to the entire frame. You would add a mask, and then I would paint out the background. In this instance, and this is very rough, I would do something like, no, do it right. Something like that, which means, okay, obviously you guys get me. I'm just kind of crude this. But that means now that the entire giraffe would be sharpened, i.e. monochrome, but the background is shining through. Okay, I literally flew through that, right? I flew through that, but that's kind of how you would do it. Right, I like that idea. I think that's about it. Any new questions? No. Guys, just ideas. Those are just ideas. Go and play with some of them. Go and look at this. We'll have this up on YouTube tomorrow morning. Go and check it out. And if you have any other questions, let me know. I like the idea. So my next webinar, next 2-hour one is on Wednesday this week, advanced Lightroom editing. We're going to go deeper and slower, way deeper. And then next week, I'm doing one on printing, which we're going to look at how to maximize your images for print and how to prep them and how to use specific tools, right? Yes, we can do that. And then I also like the idea of layers and spending 45 minutes just on layers to look at how to blend them, how to add text, how to add images on top of it, and so on and so forth. All right. Guys, you know where to get hold of me. I'm back online. And if you have any questions, hit me up on Instagram, send me a mail. But otherwise, great. More on layers. Martha, coming up. Done. I will load them soon. That's very kind. Thank you so much. That's it. Wherever in the world you are, good morning, good evening, and good night. Guys, have a great evening. My name is Gerry. I'm from Wile Eye. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.